Welcome to the Real Estate Talk podcast with myself, Oliver Ingalls, and my esteemed co-host, as always, Benji Weinberger. If you take anything from today's podcast, if you take any hints or tips, we would love for you to like, subscribe, and share.
I personally don't think I'm going to let my kids, or hopefully at some point I have kids, have phones until they're like 18 years old.
The kids that bullied you at school, have any of them kind of gotten back in touch, apologised or tried to brown nose you?
Such a good question.
And we weren't sure if they wanted to come to see the property.
True.
Or if they wanted to see you. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
Like I was spiked by somebody.
Wow.
Yeah. There was one other situation where I felt really, really unsafe. They asked me where I had been when I went to the loo.
Rosi Walden.
Rosie starred in Made in Chelsea. She also starred in Netflix's Buying London. And you're going to have to watch until the end to see what Rosie's superpower is.
Rosie has rented a property in Notting Hill for £58,000 per week. She has just under 100,000 followers across all digital platforms. And she tells us in today's podcast how she navigates the pressure of an entrepreneurial family. Let's go. Rosie, thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. I always say this, but honestly, I was genuinely super excited for today's podcast. And I know I've said that about a lot of them now, but you have inspired me so much over the last 3 years since I've been at DDRE and constantly help. Like, I see you as a barometer on certain levels, and I'm like trying to aspire to like be as entrepreneurial and as creative as Rosie. So first of all, from me, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Is this because you've just come back from Japan? And
Exactly. This is exactly how I express my gratitude now. No, but likewise, the feeling is very mutual. Benji, you inspire me too, don't worry about it.
Well, seeing as he said it.
Just
Right.
a little gratitude circle going on.
Brilliant.
That's very sweet, thank you.
Pleasure. So, how we like to start all of our podcasts, okay, is we like to dive back into the early kind of parts of your kind of childhood and your upbringing. So for the next 3 or 4 minutes, just give us a little bit of a snippet from Rosie at 10 years old for the next 5 years.
Okay, well, one thing you should know about me is I have terrible long-term memory.
Same.
So if I actually have to think when I was like 10 years old, it's not going to go well. But we can definitely talk about my childhood. I grew up in London, which I think you both know. So a lot of what I do now is in Notting Hill, Holland Park. You obviously also know that, but I grew up in Holland Park. I was at day school in London, and then I went to university in London. So I really haven't got out that much, but I do think it's the greatest city in the world. And no, okay, what was I like? I think you touched on the fact that I'm quite entrepreneurial, as are probably most advisors at DDRE. That's kind of like part and parcel of the fact that we all run our own businesses. We joined DDRE, which is brokerage, not an agency. But I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit. So we used to go to, and we still sometimes go down to West Sussex, and with my neighbours, I kind of like, I don't know what the right word is, but got my neighbours riled up to create this like fruit and vegetable stand. And we were probably around 10 years old.
Yeah.
Because they had like an orchard next door. I mean, they had a beautiful, beautiful big property. We had a little cottage next door, and we would grow vegetables and then pick and forage what we could. And actually, I don't know if half the stuff we were selling was probably inedible, looking back, but we created this little fruit and vegetable stand on the side of the road. And so whether it was doing stuff like that, which I really enjoyed, or whether it was, selling like stationery at school and like sticker books and things, I don't know, there were so many different businesses, let's put them in quotation marks, that I had when I was younger. I was really nerdy. So I was quite badly bullied when I was at my primary school, which was not fun at the time. But I was like on the chess team. I was just not very cool at all. I was not like sporty, particularly. So much has changed. Just kidding. But I always think that's quite funny to think back to that, because that really like being bullied is not a nice thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that has impacted me in later life, but I always think that's quite interesting.
Yeah. How do you, I mean, if you could summarize it, because look, I also got bullied when I was really young. We've said about on previous podcasts, I used to have really bad acne, like awful, and I got bullied really hard, especially during secondary school. And I actually think it certainly made me stronger, more resilient now,
Yeah, good.
And I think that's one takeaway I've always had from it. Some people, it can really mentally scar for longer periods of time, but not in a obviously it's never a good thing. But do you think there's anything else that it builds from actually having that kind of, being bullied in the, for yourself? Like what have you kind of felt?
Yeah, I think resilience is a really good point that I've often thought about. And I actually think there's a lot of overlap between, let's say, like being an entrepreneur and being resilient. Like that's one of the key skills I think you need, especially with our industry. It's very deal based and you are kind of like constantly working on the next deal. And if you don't like get that business yourself, you're not going to make an income maybe that month, that like whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So you have to learn to deal with those when people say no, how you deal with that and how you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, move on and kind of like keep going. So I think that's really key. And then the other thing I would say is that it also just built probably like some kind of like, I don't know, I hope everybody has empathy, but some additional empathy and that feeling of like, always wanting to be kind, always wanting to be inclusive. I just think it's nice to be a nice person. And if you're at the opposite end of that, like fortunately I wasn't horrifically bullied. It was more like mean girl stuff and being left out and like people gossiping and not saying very nice things and leaving you out. But that made me feel so left out that I never wanted anybody else to feel like that.
That's a great point.
So that's kind of how I try to be with everyone.
Yeah.
But
it's also harder now because I suppose, look, with digital platforms and social media, I mean, probably 90% of bullying now takes place online. I mean, we've all had comments, haven't we, from, social platforms, from random people out there. And probably, again, people take it closer to heart, or some people rebound and are resilient from it. But how do you kind of respond from any digital hate?
There's always going to be haters online. I think we're really fortunate in that we've, like, I don't know, when I was at school, there was maybe like MySpace and Bebo, but it wasn't, you would go home from school and log on for like 20 minutes or whatever you were, and then you would put it away and you wouldn't think about it all day. Whereas now, I personally don't think I'm going to let my kids, well, hopefully at some point I have kids, have phones until they're like 18 years old. I don't see the need. I think it's really harmful. There's lots of good that can come out of technology, but I also think there's like very real downsides of social media, which it's good that people are talking about it more now. So I think that's a lot harder to deal with if it's constantly there and constantly in your face. And obviously if you're having that exposure from a younger age. So I feel like the fact that we were exposed to social media later means you're already equipped with those coping mechanisms.
Yes, great.
And you know that it doesn't really matter and it's not real life. So I think that's very fortunate. But otherwise, I sometimes just laugh at them, to be honest. I feel like, again, having that empathy, like whoever is writing that stuff is obviously not having a very good day. So that's their problem, not mine.
And so obviously you're, in the public eye to a certain extent, from your background and those shows you've been on, the kids that bullied you at school, have any of them kind of gotten back in touch, apologized, or tried to brown nose you because of who you are?
Such a good question. No one's gotten in touch to apologize. That would be very niche, I think. No, they haven't. I mean, if anybody wants to, then feel free. But it is funny to see people because I think also because I grew up in London and I'm still living and working here, and I went to quite an international school. So some people left, but there are still a lot of people who live here, and you do cross paths. And I think it's very easy to assume when you have an interaction with someone that it's going to be a one-off and you'll never see them again. And that's such a wrong assumption to make because so often we'll cross paths with people later in life, or, you know, at another point when you wouldn't expect it. And if you've treated that person badly, you're going to look really stupid when you need something from them later. And I'm not saying that that's like the case. But I think, you know, everybody says like actions speak louder than words. I feel like you can't think about what other people think of you. You just have to do your own thing and be happy that the decisions that you're making in your life and like the things that you're doing are things that you can be proud of or that you can live with. And then it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks. So, you know, I was, like, as you've said, I've been on TV. When I first was on TV, I was on a reality TV show called Made in Chelsea, which was a very controversial choice for, you know, the people that I was around and people I went to school with. I know so many people were so happy to like bitch about that decision for me to do that. And I just didn't really care. And I still, you know, I look back and like, yeah, maybe it's a little bit cringe, but it was a great opportunity. We traveled, I met loads of interesting people. Everything in life happens because of like other decisions that you've made. It's all like a knock-on domino effect. So I think if you just keep making decisions that you are okay with, you end up in a place like no one knows where you're going to be in 5 years time, but you end up somewhere that you're like happy and you can look back and be like, yeah, that was cool.
I mean, Made in Chelsea, how many seasons were you on in Made in Chelsea?
Honestly, I can't even remember. It's not that I've blacked it out or anything. I think it was like, I want to say 2 seasons.
2 or 3, something like that. More. And obviously you were one of in the earlier kind of, you know, seasons effectively. How did that first of all come about? And how has that affected you positive and negatively?
Okay, so I think I joined like sort of in the middle, like, I don't know, it's gone on for so long now. There were obviously the OGs, who was like one generation above me. I wasn't part of that. I joined basically because I was at school in London. When I was at school, I had casting director people because of like friends and friends of friends reaching out, and what they would do is they would like follow you on Facebook, and then they'd like send you a message on Facebook and be like, hey. And because it was quite I don't know, that was just, I guess, the company that I kept. It was quite an unpopular thing to do. So I always was like, no. And then I went to university and they reached out again and I said no again. And then I was working and I said no again. And then what happened was I finished my job. I was doing like a graduate scheme at Sotheby's, the auction house, not the real estate company. And I wanted to go and do a law conversion. And they reached out again just at that moment where I was about to start my law conversion. And it was one of those moments where I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a student again. Can't hurt to earn. I mean, they pay really badly. Shouldn't probably say that, but it's not that you're getting paid to be on this thing. But I thought, okay, I'll earn a bit of extra cash and it's a fun experience and I'm at university, so why not just, you know, like, go for it. And I believe in saying yes to things. So I said yes. And yeah, it was because I think like people I knew from London were kind of on the show or involved, and there was some sort of a connection there, very tenuous connection. But it was quite, so I think on the negative side, first of all, it was quite a lot to juggle with, I didn't really realize. Thinking back now, like obviously trying to do a 3-year law degree in 1 year is going to be a lot of
challenging
work.
itself.
It's challenging. But as I said, I like to say yes to things and take on a lot. So I think that was quite hard to deal with, like keeping up with the law course. And then also, you know, you would get a text at like 7 p.m. being like, we need you at 7:30 tomorrow morning at this location. And you'd be like, oh God, how am I going to rearrange my whole day to make this work?
Of course,
so that was quite a challenge, but good. You know, I think it's good to like be busy and do multiple things and you keep your brain engaged. So yeah, that was probably one of the more difficult things. And then, as I said, like positives, met loads of interesting people from lots of different backgrounds that like maybe I wouldn't have otherwise met in my life. We got to travel, which was cool. I love traveling. So we did a couple of really interesting trips, and just putting yourself out there outside of your comfort zone. I mean, I still get really nervous in front of the camera. It doesn't come naturally to me. But it's just good, I think, to push yourself and to do something different.
Yeah, I love that.
And so we'll obviously come on to the Netflix, but with the Made in Chelsea, and I guess ties in with the Netflix side as well, obviously people will see perhaps the positives that you just touched on. I assume there's lots of negatives and hardship that comes with it, maybe?
There are, look, it's not easy to be in the public eye, and particularly with a show like Made in Chelsea. I mean, the British media is not kind to anyone. So they love to pick up on like anything. I've always just kind of, as I said, like battered it off and not let it affect me. But you do have to be a little bit more aware and alert and careful. And in hindsight, you know, every interaction you have to think like, how could this be perceived? How can this come across? What's the kind of like subtext behind this interaction? If you're meeting someone new, a lot of people who were like closer to me were quite concerned that it would be maybe difficult to like go back into the professional world after doing something like that. But I do think the world's changed a lot now. Like, I feel like so many people have been on a reality, a TV show of some description, or have a public profile on social media and, you know, are in the public eye. So I think that barrier has been broken down and is sort of widely like much more accepted. But obviously there are people who hold the opposing view and they're like, oh God, she's that reality TV girl.
And do you get like, because obviously there's been some other TV programs where, you know, people have really struggled. Do you get like any training of how to deal with the world?
Press or media?
Really. I mean, like maybe, like a brief PR sit down of like, how do you answer questions in an interview? Or like, if you're at a bar and someone comes up to you and is really friendly and starts asking loads of questions, they could be somebody from the media, like trying to trick you into saying something that you shouldn't say. But I think it also comes back again in a weird way to what I said about like just being kind to people. I really feel like if you're a good person and you know your values and you kind of like live by those values, then you're going to behave in the right way.
And do you take that into a working environment as well as in personal, in terms of just treating everyone in the right way, doing the right things? You touched on before, not thinking short term, thinking long term. I guess there's a lot of overlap between how we are at work and what you just mentioned personally, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just at the end of the day, like being a good person
love that.
In both. And you should be the same person. I think you should be the same person at work and in your personal life. Because if you try to have this like facade that you're this perfect, prim and proper, professional, obviously you should be a bit more professional at work and have fun when you're not at work. But I think you need to, broadly speaking, like be the same person and live by those values. I think what you touched on with reality TV, and you know, there's been cases where very sadly there have been like suicides of people on reality TV shows or other kind of really negative impacts. It gets very messy when you don't have a stable foundation in your life. Or for example, like I barely drink. There were situations where I was on Made in Chelsea and we went to Buenos Aires on one trip, which was actually the darkest it got for me. But we all went out for drinks and there was like, I was spiked by somebody.
Wow.
Yeah. And it could have ended up a lot worse. So I'm really glad that it didn't. It's the only time I've been spiked in my life, touch wood, so far. But I even then, like I did drink a bit more and I would go out and have fun, but this was just kind of another level. So that was difficult to deal with. But I think, in cases where people are like drinking and going out and going a bit too crazy and don't really have their life together, then you add something in like reality TV, which is just a magnifying glass on the whole situation. Your life just kind of can unravel a little bit. And actually going back to school as well, what I would say when you asked about my childhood is I was always really fortunate that I had a very stable home life and my parents are still together. They've been married for decades and they were always like there, which I'm so grateful for. And I really see that with other people who aren't that fortunate and don't have that. And I think you can deal with a lot in life if you have a stable foundation. And maybe it's not like your parents or your family, but just having routine and like, you know, if it's that you wake up in the morning and you work out and then you've set yourself up for the day, then you can deal with a lot more hardship, I think.
Yes, brilliant. So let's go back a little bit then. So you went to do a university, you've kind of got a 3-year law degree, which you're cramming into 1 year, which is incredibly ambitious and actually probably summarizes you up. How does that then fold into real estate? Like how does it tell us those next couple of years after that?
Good question. So it kind of, we have to go back to go forwards, because when I was 15 or 16, I had an Easter holiday, and I really don't like to sit still and not do anything. So like if there's a holiday, I'm doing something. I don't really believe in time off, but anyway, I find it very hard to like sit on a beach. I'm gonna then like read books or do something. So anyway, there was an Easter holiday at school and I didn't have anything to do and there were like no plans. So I decided I was gonna get some work experience, and I didn't really have anyone I could ask who was gonna offer me any work experience. So I was walking around Notting Hill and there was a Stratton Parker office, which for whatever reason, I walked in there and I just asked them if they would give me some work experience. Nice. And they said yes, which is very nice. So props to them.
Amazing.
For that. So I did, I think it was just a couple of weeks, but I really enjoyed it. And that was kind of like planted the seed. And then I've always been one of those people who like, I don't know, walks around London, it's like, oh, I wonder what's behind that door, or isn't that building amazing? And I love architecture and interior design. So I've always kind of carried that with me. And then, yeah, it is kind of random, I would say. But if we piece it all together, like, you know, that interest in art and interior design and architecture, working in sales and in like the luxury industry, let's say. So when I was on the grad scheme, I was doing watches and jewelry. Yeah. And then I was headhunted and they took me into their contemporary art department at Sotheby's. So that was kind of, you know, there's a lot of transferable skills. It's a sales role and you're working with often very high net worth clients. So you build a lot of those kind of skills. And then I did my law conversion. I never wanted to be a lawyer, by the way. I just was really interested in like contracts and tax and how to run a business and like all of that kind of thing. And then after that, I was like, okay, so what am I going to do now? And real estate sort of made sense. And I thought it was a very exciting industry and also a career where like building relationships with people was really important. And I think that's one of the things I'm quite good at, but also it's nice to spend time with people instead of just on a computer all day.
Yeah. And I think it's brilliant. One thing that I've just taken from all that is that you went out your comfort zone to walk into that first ever Stratton Parker office at 16 or wherever you were during the summer holidays. 95% of people, summer holidays, all they're thinking about is where I'm going on holiday and going out. You were like, do you know what? I'm going to go and better myself. No one pushed you to do this. And you walked into an office where everyone in there is probably double your age, and you asked for some work experience, and you got it. Like, that is amazing. That is so, like, it's brilliant. Where do you think that drive has come from to do that? What made you go, right, I'm going to go and do that tomorrow?
So I think where the drive comes from is like a relatively easy answer for me. My dad always had his own business and always was self-employed. He, like, again, from obviously I didn't know him when he was 16, but from the stories that I hear, you know, like same thing when he was at school, when he was at uni, first he was like promoting bands at the local like town hall or whatever. Then he was organizing tours for these bands. Then he was working with like really big artists. Then he went into theater, and it was always like, okay, what's the next thing? Where am I gonna, you know, create something and build a business from? So I always saw that with him. And when we were young, he was always working super late. And even on my mum's side, like she was looking after us, but she was running the household and she was like, you know, doing everything as it should, I don't know, as it should be done. So from both of them, that was very inspiring. And then, I think just, I've always had that, whether it's like from, you know, the vegetable stand, which is obviously a fake job, not a real job, but to kind of like helping at my cousin had a clothing boutique, which I helped at on the weekends when I was like 12 and 13, but you're not actually allowed to work for a proper company at that age, but she let me, which was great. So nice. I was kind of like helping behind the till or stealing the clothes or, you know, whatever. Yeah. And then I worked at the pub when I was 15. I think you were allowed to at 15. Not drinking, but just cleaning up. So I've always kind of had jobs, and that was very normal to me. And it was also something like in our family, if you wanted to buy something, you had to save up and earn the money for it and buy it yourself. So yeah, it's always been, I guess, just like subtly there in the background. And I've done so many different jobs, and I worked at the Olympics selling merchandise when we had the Olympics in London.
But the last thing is you've had so much exposure to different demographics of people, you know, and that, you know, like you said earlier, is 90% of our jobs is people related, you know, and reading emotions and how to build relationships with people, and having that grounding certainly would have helped you, I'm sure. For the younger people out there now, what advice would you give them to start breeding those skill sets?
I think obviously now one of the really good things that people can do is listen to podcasts like this one, because just in terms of like expanding, broadening your horizons and learning like what is possible. Because I don't know if it's a me thing or if it's just as a young person, the world can look very overwhelming. And what I mean by that is like people who are successful, you just see the tip of the iceberg. You don't necessarily see like everything that they've been through to get to that point. So listening to podcasts, at least for me, it's something I do regularly. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy like created this amazing business from like £500 or, you know, whatever. Like the lessons that you can learn from podcasts are huge. But then in terms of like what you were saying and all the roles that I've had and different jobs that I've done, even if it seems like an insignificant job, like working in a pub, how does that translate to like running your own business? But there are so many skills that you can learn from that job that you can then take with you in life. And like you said, meeting lots of different people, interacting with people. It might not come naturally to you. You might be shy, you might be nervous or not know how to kind of build relationships. But I can guarantee that once you've, you know, like tried and had those conversations, you will get better at it.
100%.
This is very ironic because I'm now like struggling to, to articulate what I mean. But it's just, and also a little bit what I was saying about how the world is quite a small place and you might overlap like paths with people when you don't expect it. That can happen in like, you might be, like I said, like working in a pub or waiting tables in a restaurant and you meet someone and then later in life, you're like, oh, do you remember that? And then something comes out of it that you just couldn't expect. And I've had situations like that. I'm trying to think now of a good example, but I think just putting yourself out there and trying to do lots of things and building like a really good work ethic as well. Because it doesn't matter what you do in life. If you're working for somebody else, they're going to appreciate a good work ethic. And if you're working for yourself, you have no excuse. Like if you don't have a work ethic, you are not going to make any money, as you guys know as well.
100%.
So learning how to work, even though that sounds really basic, is super important.
Yeah. Do you know what? He's really interesting. I was having the same conversation with someone the other day. I think I've definitely become more entrepreneurial over the last 3 years. And I think we even said about it, almost feel addicted now to learning more. When I don't think I had that actually from an early start. So I think, you know, with your upbringing, with your parents and your father, you know, having businesses, you've always been around those conversations at the dinner table, you know, the coffees, you've probably been listening into conversations he's been having, or Zoom, probably not Zooms during the time, but, and that has kind of bred you to kind of be inspired to want to learn and broaden your horizons. Whereas I don't think I had that. And I think over the last 3 years, I've done that more and more. And like I said, with podcasts now and books and YouTube and literature out there, it's at your fingertips. You just need to engage with it. And when you get into that rabbit hole, it's actually hard to like just flick through YouTube and looking at people eating. You're like, this is super boring. And then you find an inspirational post and you stick on that, or you find a business post and you're like, oh my God, I love that. That is epic, isn't it now?
No, 100%.
You know?
And I think it's, you're probably right. There was probably a lot, like subconsciously, I think there's a lot that you can pick up from being around other people.
Yeah.
And even if you're in a coffee shop, like I am not ashamed to say I'm super nosy. And I was literally, my nickname was Nosy Rosie because I was always,
Love that.
but I think I actually used to be really embarrassed. I would never admit that. But now I feel like that's something to be proud of.
Yeah,
and it's
100%.
something that everybody should have, that curiosity and that like, and even if you don't think, oh God, I'm not hungry to learn, like what's wrong with me? But if you're sitting in a cafe and there's like an interesting conversation happening at the table next to you, like be a little bit nosy, listen to what they're saying, like you might learn something.
Yeah.
And so with podcasts as well, even if you, because they say that, I don't know what the expression is, but it's like you're the product of your 5 closest people who you spend time with or whatever it might be. So then you think, oh God, but my 5 closest people are like not super successful or super inspiring, or I don't know, whatever. They're just your friends. That's fine. But you can create those 5 people by what you consume. And yes, you could choose to spend hours and hours like doom scrolling on Instagram and TikTok. And some of that content might be informative and educational, but you could also curate what you're consuming so that you're constantly learning. And I completely agree with you. I'm the same as you. I think like the more that I get into that kind of like self-improvement, it sounds so cringe. But why wouldn't we want to be the best version of ourselves?
Well, we were just talking just before the podcast about the gym, you know, and like getting up early, going to the gym, you know, having that kind of like, how many macros am I going to hit today? And you want to be better, you know, and that's why you're doing it. And it's self-discipline, because you don't have to do it. You can go and eat whatever you want today. You don't have to go down to the gym, but actually all part of that self-progression is your whole life, not just actually what you're learning, but how your health is, your lifestyle. It's everything. It encompasses everything.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it doesn't even have to be like, it can be a bit overwhelming to think, oh God, now I've got to like go to the gym for half an hour every day, and I've got to listen to a podcast for an hour every day, and I've got to do this, and like too much, like that just can be a bit overwhelming. But even if it's just starting with a little bit, and then you plant the seed and then it grows, and like a week later you will have learned something new that you didn't know the week before. Or you will have like walked somewhere for 20 minutes if you don't have time to go to the gym, you know, like small changes can make a massive difference.
Love that.
And I think that's something that anyone can do, and there's really like no excuse.
So you're quite vocal in terms of showing your journey and your story on your socials, you know, your yoga and everything. And we've had Jess and other female advisors on our podcast, you know, who have shared their struggles being a lady in a perhaps what can be seen as a male-dominated industry, and obviously they're trying to change that. I think, do you have an added layer on top of that, given that you have been in the public eye, you've been on Made in Chelsea, you've obviously been on Netflix, which we actually need to talk about. Do you find that people, because we've also been on viewings, by the way, and we weren't sure if they wanted to come to see the property or if they wanted to see you. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
No, it's the truth. So
how do you deal with that?
It's a good question. So that definitely wasn't the first incident, let's say, where I have felt a little bit nervous or uncertain being on a viewing with someone. Obviously this job as well, like if you are sometimes in properties alone with strangers, which is quite a weird, and my mum has warned me about that many times, just constantly panicking. So I was very grateful that you were there on that occasion when we had this gentleman who came to see a property. And you never know, because he could be a genuine £10 million buyer and you then can't be funny with him. Or there could be another reason that he's there, and you know, they've seen you on social media and they're like creating this story in their head. So you do have to be careful, and I think you have to be self-aware and also take precautions. So actually in that instance, and he has since disappeared, so what does that tell you? But I think you do get a gut feeling, and I had a little bit of a gut feeling, which is why I thought in particular, obviously as well as all of your knowledge about the property, it might be sensible to do that viewing together. So you have to be just on guard a little bit and not too trusting, unfortunately. There was one other situation where I felt really, really unsafe. That was when I was in corporate agency and I was on a viewing, and this gentleman kept standing like super close to me and always between me and the door. And in the end, I like managed to text my boss, just like, FYI, I'm here. This is a bit dodgy. So yeah, I think unfortunately that is a reality of the job. There are things that you can do, like sharing your location, sharing your diary with people, making sure that people always know where you are and who you're meeting and like what you're doing, just to safeguard and protect yourself. And I think, yes, probably being kind of in the public eye, having an open profile on social media, being on TV, that like heightens it as well. But then I would also say on the flip side of that, there are, I think, some perks to being a woman, not just in life, but in real estate, in the sense that I have a lot of female clients who, and I, you know, you could think, oh, that's just like random, but I actually think there's a reason for that, and it's that women feel comfortable around me, and I make them like really enjoy the process of like working with me.
Yes.
And you know, women are just earning more and more money now. So that's a great client base to have. No, I'm kidding. But I think, you know, there's probably a lot of talk about like how like scary it can be and negative. And I wouldn't want that to deter anybody from entering the industry, because actually more and more women are joining and working in real estate. We have so many women working in our business who are amazing and amazingly successful. And as long as you just have your wits about you, as you unfortunately always need to do, then I think it's still a fantastic job.
Because you're, as I touched on, your socials are amazing. I mean, you've got your crew, you've got, you know, your own website. I think you're building your own brand, which is amazing. Do you think then you have a responsibility to try to pave the way for other people to look at you and be like, well, if Rosie can do that and build her profile and show that she does yoga and show that she goes to Japan and all these sort of things, that they can copy you in a way?
Yeah, I think that it's, and that's not just for women as well, by the way.
In general.
In general, I feel like one of the things that Daniel, our CEO, just in case anyone doesn't know Daniel, said in one of the like early meetings after I had just joined the business, and I think he's mentioned in a couple of interviews, which really like struck a chord with me, was that he felt like when he was working in corporate agency, there was a little bit of like almost shame in saying that he was a real estate advisor or an estate agent. It's like almost a dirty word. And it really like struck a nerve with me, because he said he was sitting around with his friends who were maybe like bankers or consultants and had all these sort of like flashy titles, which are much more highly regarded. And he wanted to be proud of his job and create a job and an industry where people would be proud to be working in real estate. And so I think it goes beyond like just inspiring people to get into real estate, which is very important, and to create a personal brand. It's kind of like in whatever industry you work in, be really proud of your job, whether you are an entrepreneur and you have your own business, or whether you work for somebody else and you can be an entrepreneur and have that entrepreneurial spirit in a company or working for someone else, and take ownership. And so I hope that I would inspire people to think big with like whatever they're doing. You can create a personal brand. And we've seen it now with social media. Everything from like being a like florist to being someone who like, I don't know, there are the most random jobs that are, or for example, there's a development in Mayfair, a super prime development, which I was touring the other day, and the spa they had a spa consultant, and her whole job is to go around the world and test luxury spas and then consult and advise people on how to build a luxury spa. Wicked. You can create a job out of anything.
That's brilliant.
You just have to put your mind to it and build your personal brand.
So touching on the point that you said in terms of Daniel being around a table and, you know, feeling like saying he's an estate agent, as you said, is a dirty word, tying in with Netflix and Buying London, do you think that tried to shine a better light on agents and London alike?
I mean, I hope so. I think it tried to, yes. I think that it's really, okay, so I don't know if this is just something that I keep falling into, but around the time I did my law conversion, there was a very popular series called Suits. And prior to Suits, I think law was probably considered a really, really boring profession, and very dry and serious. And by the way, it is quite dry. But Suits made it super sexy. And then loads of people wanted to be lawyers. And I feel like there has been this sort of wave of TV shows spotlighting real estate. And real estate from like a developer's perspective, I think has always been quite sexy. And in the US, it's like a kind of sexy industry, but it has not been in the UK.
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that the Netflix show was hoping, and I think it did a really good job of spotlighting not just real estate, but also London as an amazing city.
Yeah.
And a great place to work.
Love that.
As well.
So corporate agency.
Yes.
If we were doing an interview now, okay, I'd be like, she's too
Human.
No, not human, but she's too entrepreneurial. She's, you're such a free spirit, which I find amazing because you're, like you said, traveling around the rail, broadening your horizons all the time, trying different things. Surely that was hard for you, corporate agency, when you're like, okay, Rosie, you've got the job. See you tomorrow morning at 8:30 and you've got to sit at your desk till 6 o'clock. Like, how was that period of time, good and bad for you?
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong, which is why we're here.
Yeah.
And I'm not still there. But no, I think, so one of the things that, I mean, I learned a lot, right? Because that was my first job in real estate. Well, actually, I worked for a developer before that, which was a little more, what is the right word? Eclectic, I want to say. I really have no idea how to describe it. He is completely bananas, but really inspiring.
Yeah.
And that was, a more typical corporate job, working on like investor relations at the very, very early stages of a big real estate project that was happening here in London. And so, but that was a little more free flowing, let's say.
Yeah.
And then going to a corporate agency to learn the ropes and to get some experience in just pure estate agency was very different. And yes, it was a little bit like fitting a round peg in a square hole or vice versa.
Yeah.
So there were things that I had to do to like make that more enjoyable and to inspire myself. But at the same time, I learned so much. And I think there's, I've spoken about like work ethic and kind of learning how to work. And that's so important. So now I know what it means to sit at a desk from 8:30 in the morning until 6 in the evening and basically, okay, not in corporate agency, but at one of my previous office jobs, they asked me where I had been when I went to the loo. Like, it was that monitored. I was like, I just needed a pee. I'm so sorry. So I know what that means.
Yeah.
And I know what it means to get in at 8:30 and then at 9 a.m. you're on the phones.
Yeah.
And you're on the phones for 2 hours, or you're constantly making calls. You've got targets. You need to. So it's a very different way of working from how I work now, but I have done it, and that was invaluable.
Yes.
And also being in an office around other people who have been in the industry for a long time and learning from them, there's something to be said for being in an office around people. If you're new, you're learning a lot through osmosis, like subconsciously. Again, it's a bit like overhearing someone at a cafe having an interesting conversation. You are hearing more senior people in the business dealing with difficult situations, like what happens when a deal goes wrong or it's almost falling out of bed, how do you get it back? Like all of these things that you wouldn't learn otherwise. So I think that was great. The most difficult thing for me is that I do really like being outside and fresh air. So now it's great because I can take calls and be on my phone whilst I'm like walking around the park if we have really nice weather like today. But what I did to deal with that is I would wake up early and I would go to Hyde Park and I went cold water swimming.
Nice.
Which was amazing.
Yeah,
and that was one of the best things I did.
Yeah.
So I would go at sunrise and have a dip in Hyde Park through the whole winter. We'd break the ice sometimes.
Amazing.
And it got me really fired up for the day. And it's a bit like what we were saying about going to the gym in the morning.
Yes.
Anything random like that, but it just sets you up. I had been in the park, I'd been in nature, I'd had my sunlight, or when the sun came up, I had my sunlight.
Yes,
given my body a bit of a jolt. And then I was fresh and ready to get in the office, and I was there at 8:20 and we were ready to start the day.
Brilliant.
So you find like ways to make it work.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, obviously, I love having the freedom and the pressure of having my own business. But it's a different kind of thing.
Okay, so we obviously understand that the real estate market and industry is evolving very, very quickly now. For the people who are at the corporate agency at the moment and maybe in their fledgling career, what's the tips or advice that you would give them?
Yeah, so many things. I think, so one of the things that I didn't do when I was in corporate agency, because I imagined that I would have my career there and kind of like work my way up the corporate ladder, and you become like a manager and then you become a partner or whatever it might be. Looking back, I didn't take enough agency and I didn't have enough ownership in that role, which is something that I wish I would have known. So I'm now telling people, if you're in that position, take ownership of your role and treat it like, be entrepreneurial. So treat it as though you are an entrepreneur within a bigger business. So what that looks like is, everyone you meet, you want to make a really good impression on them, because like I said, you may meet them again in the future, and maybe at that point you'll have your own thing or whatever. Even if you're still in the corporate ladder, but you're a partner, like, you make an impression on people. The first impression is the most important impression you'll make. So do it well.
Yeah.
No pressure. And then the other thing I would say is like, think strategically. So if you know, maybe you have this kind of entrepreneurial spirit, and at some point, once you've learned what you need to learn, you might want to go out possibly on your own. You need to build a book, and you'll build your network and your contacts, and start thinking like, okay, if I work with this person now, if I were to go out on my own, would they work with me?
Yeah.
Like, what do I need?
Good question.
How do I lay the foundations for that? And you're being kind of clever on someone else's money. I mean, I say that like, it's not a very nice thing for the company, but they are paying you to be there and to grow and to develop yourself as a worker.
Yes.
So do that. And it will serve you well, whether you stay in the company, because you'll get promoted and people will recognize your efforts, but it will also serve you really well if you decide to leave. So it's valuable in both instances.
Really good point.
So those are probably the two key things. And then build your personal brand, which we all love.
Yeah.
But it's super important. And like you said, the industry is changing super quickly. And so at the end of the day, the thing that you will have, that you will be able to take with you wherever you go, and no matter what you do, if you go into a different industry completely, or if you want to start a completely random business and raise money for that business, your personal brand is so important.
I love that. And so we say it to everybody, don't we? Building that personal brand. We get so many questions of, Ollie, like, we don't really know anything about the industry. So like, we're not going to put out any content which adds values to the people we're watching. What is the core belief that you have stuck to strongly about building personal brand?
It's a good question. I feel like being consistent and authentic. And I'm still working on the consistent part myself, because there's always room.
I think we all are, aren't we, all the time?
Yeah. But I think you have to be authentic. And like what I said earlier about finding your niche, and there's something for everyone. Like, there's a girl who built a multi-million-dollar beauty brand out of the fact that she did beekeeping with her dad on the weekends, and that turned into that multi-million-dollar beauty brand. Like, even your weird random hobbies that you think no one cares about, talk about them, because you might connect with someone and somebody else might really love that about you, and that's invaluable. And it's also what sets you apart from other people. So I think even if you feel like, oh, but I don't know what my personal brand is, or I don't have anything to talk about, just talk about your daily life, you know, the things that you find interesting, and they might not appeal to everyone, but you will find people who resonate with them and they will stick with you. And that's how you'll kind of like grow your brand.
Do you think you have to work harder on your personal brand, given you are a real estate advisor within DDRE? Because there might be people that would say, for argument's sake, you're on Netflix, you're a Made in Chelsea. Do you think you have to work harder to prove to them? Because we all know, the deals that you do, but perhaps people don't see that. Do you have to work even harder to overcome that?
So I would say when I was on Made in Chelsea, it was a weird thing that I noticed, that people who didn't know me at all, like strangers on the internet, let's say, like the general public, had one perception of me. And then obviously the people who knew me really well, like my friends and family, they knew like me. And so the TV stuff like didn't even come into play. It was the people in between who kind of knew me, but not really, who built a view of me that was not very accurate. And that was the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And often those are people that you might do business with because they're like 1 degree of separation or 2 degrees of separation. So I think that it's taken me several years to build my, let's say, credibility
Yeah.
for that group of people to recognize that, oh, she is doing these deals, or she is actually like, and I've had now people say to me like, oh, it's so refreshing that you're actually a real estate agent. And I'm like, yeah, what, what do you think I am? So that took a long time. I think the people who really don't know you, they just will believe whatever you put out there in a way, because that's what they see of you. And then your family and friends, they obviously know all sides of you. So that does take a bit more, let's say, convincing. But I also think that because the world we live in is so fast paced and people want to do a million things, and there's things that are sexy on social media or careers that seem really attractive at one point in time, and people jump on the bandwagon, and then a lot of people fall away. So the other thing that helps is just doing it for a long time. And like, you know, you can front and you can like fake it till you make it, but at the end of the day, people are going to believe you and trust you when they're like, oh, she's actually still doing this. I thought it was just a fad or a phase. Like, so no. True.
That must have been so frustrating, like trying to change the narrative where you know it's not true. Like me and you, Benj, we've always just been in real estate, you know, so like everyone always just has known us for that. Whereas, like you said, you've had to, challenge that perspective of you. And I sometimes think if one person doesn't like me for whatever reason or I've done something, and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like, what can I do to change that person? Let alone having thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people. That must have been quite hard mentally as well for you during those periods.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I'm somebody like you, I think, who is a people pleaser. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I would like people to like me. And I seek that kind of validation from people. So when people don't, or they have an opinion of you that you feel is unfair or is not accurate, that's quite difficult to deal with. But I think, you know, over the years and having now done like more than one show, it does teach you that people are always going to have their opinions and you cannot let it get to you, and you know who you are, and the people you really care about who are important to you, they also hopefully know who you are. And it goes back to that thing of like not being a Jekyll and Hyde, like not putting on a fake persona for the camera or for your work or for whatever in your life, and just being authentic and being yourself. Obviously, we always slightly try to kind of position ourselves in a certain light, and that's not a bad thing. But that can be quite difficult to deal with. But I would also say that there's a flip side of that, and the positive. I always try to find the positive in everything. Is that social media and that exposure has been amazing for my business. And I've found clients who have reached out through Instagram and then have ended up going on to, you know, retain me or help them rather, sell something. And we're talking about like millions of pounds worth of property. That's amazing. So it's worth it. I don't care if people think that it's lame, because I've done business out of it. So it's proven.
So talking about, you know, that you perhaps seeking validation to be liked and those sort of things. So the very accomplished Rosie that sat here today, what would you say to yourself at 5 years old? Poor old little Rosie was getting bullied. What would you say in hindsight?
Nosy Rosie, whatever.
Exactly. I was going to say, like, actually looking back, maybe she didn't help herself in all of those situations. No, I don't know. I don't know, just like don't take anything too much to heart. Listen to feedback and like gather data points, because I do think that you need to be self-aware. And if you're getting a lot of one type of feedback, maybe there's a way to take that on board that is constructive. But be true to yourself and know that, you know, you're not a bad person. So like you can do what you want within reason. And I made like a lot of very random decisions. Like my career has been quite like choppy, some would even say. But actually every single experience or decision taught me something really important that has helped me now today. Or I met someone really interesting and learned something from them, or that inspired me. And so you just keep moving forwards and you cannot worry about what other people think, because who cares?
I love that. So the future. Do you set yourself 2, 3, 4, 5 year kind of targets, objectives of where you want to be? Or like what does Rosie want in the future?
the existential question. Now the therapy session begins. No, so I'm really bad with like KPIs and targets, and that was also something about corporate. I'm like, it's just too regimented. But yes, I have like an idea or a vision of where I would like things to go, and I'm constantly also refining that and pivoting, because I think, you know, if you asked me that question 2 years ago, there's no way that I would have said like everything exactly as how it is now. Some people are like that, and if you are, then great. But definitely, like, I never used to set New Year's resolutions, and I still don't I don't think I stick to them. But I think it's choosing a moment in the year where it could be New Year's or it could be like any other point of the year where you think, okay, what are my goals for the business or personally for the next 12 months? And then you have that like vision or idea or kind of dream, let's say, of what the next 5 to 10 years looks like, that's sort of guiding your decisions in the background. And it's quite good to keep checking in with that. So you can say, like, if you're not sure about something, well, is this decision going to get me closer to that goal? But it's not so prescribed. And then you're thinking, okay, for the next 12 months, this is going to be the focus of my business. So like when you set up a business or say you join a new company, there's a lot of like admin and just getting your feet under the desk and like getting set up. It takes time.
Yes.
That's okay for that you need to give that its natural time. Then you think, okay, I'm settled. Basically, every time you start to feel comfortable, you need to think like, okay, what's the next thing? Because we need to keep growing and keep moving forwards.
I love that. That's wicked. And obviously you've got Luca in your life now, which probably helps amazingly as well, being a very successful businessman, you know, himself as well. But the future of, you know, family and everything like that, you know, is that on the horizon?
Okay, so Luca is my boyfriend, for anyone who doesn't know. We also have a dog. Set the scene here. We got a dog called Peekaboo. So she's his daughter. He referred to her as his daughter this weekend. I was like, wow, I don't think you can call a dog your daughter, but okay. No, I mean, we're very happy. I would at some point love to have a family, and oh my God, I suddenly thought I was 30. I was like, I'm 29. I'm not 30 yet is what I wanted to say. But not that 30 is old. But, you know, you set these
just categorize me and you, Ben. Yes. Oh my God.
No, so I have no idea like how that's all going to unfold, but it's exciting. Yeah, 100%. And I think I take that all in the same way as everything I've been saying. Like, you just take it one step at a time and see how it goes. But there have been a lot of big steps, actually. We got a dog. We moved into a new place together. So that's you know, moving 100%. At a good pace for now. I don't think we need to get ahead of ourselves. Definitely.
Look, that's been amazing. We've got a quick fire question round where the listeners and our followers have kind of written in to ask questions. So, Ben, do you want to go through your ones first?
Of course. If you could live in any property that you have sold, which one would it be?
Good one.
Oh, that is a good question. Oof. Okay, so I sold, one of my favorite properties that I've sold is a house in Kensington that I think it was a really good buy. I was retained on the buyer's side, so I think, did a really good deal. But it is a beautiful Kensington townhouse that has a pool and a spa. It needs complete renovation. It's also got a really long garden. And then at the back of the garden, you're on a communal garden square. Nice. Wow. So just everything from like the location to obviously having a pool in London, it was pretty special. And the fact that it's totally unmodernized and they're now just about to start doing a really big project. I love interior design, as I said. That I think would be
excites you.
Yeah,
love that. You travel a lot outside of the UK, and one of the questions here is, if you could buy anywhere now, okay, as a pied-à-terre, where would it be?
It's a good question. For what purpose? Because if you're talking about like, no, but if you think, okay, what's a good buy? Like, where should you buy for an investment?
Let's say pied-à-terre, it's a pure emotional
enjoyment
perspective. Where at the moment would you go out and buy tomorrow?
I have always dreamed of having a place in the south of France.
Yeah.
So I think it would have to be that. Wouldn't say no to little pied-à-terre in Paris, like a beautiful Parisian houseman style apartment. I'm half Swiss. So at some point, a chalet would be on the cards. I mean, why stick to one?
I was going to say, we've gone for free now, but that's great. I love that. Wicked.
One piece of advice for someone looking to break into the top end of the market.
Good question.
Good question. So if you are already working in real estate and you're trying to, let's say, like start dealing with more expensive properties, I think just networking as much as possible and getting yourself out there. So if there is an opportunity for you to go to an open house, even if you don't have a buyer, say you do potentially, whatever, you know, or if you just ask questions as well, because I think people are always very willing to help and to answer questions if they see that somebody is like very motivated. So yeah, whether it's like maybe there's an open house, maybe there is some kind of like a networking event. Also, Ollie, I know you do a lot of this, but like reaching out to people on LinkedIn to offer collaborations. Think about also like where can you add value, even if you don't have the experience of dealing with like luxury properties or super prime properties. Maybe there was a particularly difficult deal that you worked on and you learned something from that and you could offer value to another agent or to somebody in the industry. Just try to position yourself in those places and then you'll start to meet the right people.
Love that. The last one here, the most underrated social platform.
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, for me personally, it's been YouTube, which maybe is not underrated. Maybe it's just me being like late to the game. But I have noticed if you're looking to grow and like build a personal brand, I've really noticed like consistent, steady growth and relatively fast growth compared to other platforms on YouTube. I haven't done this, but I also know that if you're looking to like monetize your content, it's a great place to do it because YouTube will actually eventually like pay you for the content. And it's long form content that you can then, if you're spending the time creating that content, you can cut it down and distribute it across all other platforms. So for me, it would be YouTube.
Love that.
Well, on my listings, the 2 videos that you've done, they blew up.
Yeah.
I've got one final question, which might be on a good one to finish on. What is Rosie's superpower?
Oh. I tell you what, these are bloody good questions.
Yeah, they are. Do people write these?
Yeah.
It's amazing. They should just like write.
I was going to say, yeah, we should. Our job's redundant.
My superpower, I think, is making people feel really like engaged and inspired and getting people excited. So it comes down to like building relationships with people and like inspiring them as to what is possible. Hopefully.
Wicked. This has been epic. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Me too.
For everyone watching, where do they find you?
So you can obviously find me on YouTube, as I mentioned. Please subscribe. Would mean a lot. But no, so my name, Rosi, without an E on the end. So just Rosi Walden. And you'll find me on most platforms, but it's Rosi.Walden, I think, on Instagram and TikTok. Rosi Walden on YouTube. And I have a website if you'd like to check out some of the content that we post there. There's also a podcast, some blog articles, and I have a weekly newsletter as well.
What's the website? Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say www. But I feel like that is very 90s. So it's just rosiwalden.com.
Wicked, love
nice
that.
And easy.
Well, look, thank you ever so much for coming in, Rosie. It's again been epic and truly inspiring. Some amazing stories, hints and tips. I'm sure everybody watching has learned a hell of a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. I've honestly really enjoyed it, which I was very nervous, but I've had a lot of fun. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Rosie.
See you soon.
Bye.